It is a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing a local friend of mine from Tempe, Arizona, Matt Porter. How are you doing, Matt?
Great. Thanks, Howard.
And this is going to be a rare treat for you because he lives in Tempe. I went to Tempe to get my MBA in ASU. And Matt is a dental office transition specialist. It's Menlo Dental Transitions.
Menlo Dental Transitions.
Menlo Dental Transitions. I need to get my readers on. But I mean, he sells 20 dental offices a year. And what I was thinking is, our patients only get their wisdom teeth pulled once in their life. We get numb to the pulling 4 wisdom teeth all the time, doing 5-10 sets a week for 30 years. Same thing with buying or selling a practice. You only get to do it once. So I thought we'd bring in some guy who does it 20 times a year and see what you can educate my homies. So let me read your bio first. Matt has successfully transitioned dozens of dental offices and represented countless dentists who desire to sell their practice, purchase a practice, or secure a partnership. Matt has a financial background and experience that includes consulting, accounting, tax strategy, and preparing tax returns for individuals, sole proprietors, partnerships, and corporations. Since 2008, Matt has served president and treasurer on the board for multiple Arizona municipalities, where he has approved over $300 million in loans for the purpose of financing city-owned projects. Matt's previous career included managing the daily operations business unit of 300 employees and contractors with an annual budget of $50 million for a $1 billion national corporation. Matt graduated in the top 10% of his class at Brigham Young University with a Bachelor's of Science and a minor in business. He later continued his education by receiving a master's degree in business administration from the single greatest university in the universe, Arizona State University. Again, graduating in the top 10% of his class with an emphasis in small business entrepreneurship. He stays current on his education by keeping his nose in the latest issue of the Harvard Business Review. In his spare time, Matt tries to find time for the gym and golfing. In addition to spending time outdoors with his wife of 14 years and his 3 daughters and 1 son, he enjoys volunteering in various charities, including the Boy Scouts of America, Habitat for Humanity, Salvation Army, and Feed My Starving Children. You can also find Matt reading 2 or 3 books at a time. His favorite authors include Clayton Christensen, Ken Blanchard, and Stephen Covey. And poor Stephen Covey just died. He had a mountain biking accident. And I want to have a shout out to Lewis Core. Lewis Core is probably one of the smartest dentists I've ever met. He's a dentist in Glendale, and he just graduated with his ASU MBA. And even though he's been practicing 20 years, he went back. And Lewis probably has 10,000 posts on Dental Town, but truly one of the smartest guys I've ever met. So I want to set this up for you like this, Matt. So demographically, when any of my homies send me an email, they're either in dental school, probably 20% are in dental school, and it seems like the other 80% are out in the last 5 years. Most of them are associates, but when I go into all these, meet all these associates, they have their eye for a door. They want to buy a practice. So there's probably a few old guys out there like me who'd be interested in selling a practice. But let's try to aim it more at the young kid, what to look for in buying a practice.
Great.
And I also want to say that the smartest people in my backyard, like Jared Pope, are big fans of yours.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Jared's a great client.
So let's start with the valuation price, because you hear all these rules of thumbs. Like people just say, well, a practice is worth 1 year's gross.
Yeah.
1 year's collection. But what do you say about all these rules of thumb?
It drives me nuts. I think it's so haphazard to just throw a general national metric rule of thumb to something that's so intrinsic like a dental practice. There are so many tangibles, intangibles, variables that when you distill it down to a one rule of thumb metric, I think it's reckless, if not worse. And that's something that I've come across a lot from an MBA background and an acquisition and finance background outside of dental. When I came in and started specializing and honing my practice into dental transitions, it was amazing to me how oversimplified that valuation was and how generally accepted it is. Whether it's from its cocktail parties or study clubs where one guy says, hey, I sold my practice for 80% of collections, everybody takes that as gospel. And it's so backwards if I use the analogy of buying a home. You're from Kansas, correct? Mm-hmm. So if you had a buddy in Kansas call you up and say, hey, Howard, I'm thinking about buying a home out here in Kansas. How much should I pay for it? And you say, well, my home across the street here in Ahwatukee just sold for $120 a square foot. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? That has nothing to do with the market supply demand, what kind of home it is, what condition it's in, how old it is in Kansas. So when I see that oversimplification of just percentage of collections, I cringe. There's so much more to consider, both in terms of cash flow, profitability, other quantitative, and then the qualitative facets.
So what are ways to value a practice?
That's a great question. I get engaged a lot, hired a lot to do appraisals. A lot of times for...
How much does an appraisal cost?
Usually $3,500.
$3,500, and how long does that usually take?
It takes me about a week to 2 to generate. It's pretty comprehensive. It's about a 36-page appraisal, and we look at everything, both quantitative, qualitative. We'll look at the last 3 years' tax returns. We'll do an adjustment to the cash flow. And let me take a step back. So I've tried to apply a numeric methodology to help determine a value instead of just percentage of collections. So I'll do a weighted average of 3 different financial metrics: discounted cash flow, an EBITDA multiple, which you're familiar with, and then a percentage of collections. I'll do a weighted average of those and give a high and low range.
Okay, so say the 3 things again. EBITDA, what
EBITDA,
else?
A discounted cash flow model,
Okay.
and percentage of collections.
Okay, so...
I can't abandon the percentage of collections completely because it's such a long-standing metric, and frankly, you have to go get financing when you're buying a practice, and the banks still utilize that methodology. So even if I wanted to throw it out and say it's inconsequential, all the banks still use it. So I put it in the valuation.
Okay, I don't want to get on a rant on college because I think it's so funny.
Go.
Well, Vermont was the 4th state that passed dental therapist, and where someone with a year of college can go pull fillings. But
yeah,
the dentists are all upset with that. But quite frankly, I look back at my undergrad and 4 years of dental school. 90% of everything they taught me I've never used. I don't use geometry, trig, and all this stuff.
Yeah,
so none of them got EBITDA. So go over there. They don't know what EBITDA is. They don't know what discounted cash flow is.
It's okay. I don't know what an MOD is. So we're...
So go into detail on that. And I guess what I'm setting this up for is, remember, let's say 2 dental offices are being sold, and they both did $1 last year in sales, collections, revenue, but one office only made 1 penny profit, and the other office made a dime profit. Certainly they wouldn't be worth the same thing. One would have 10 times more profit than the other one, wouldn't you? But they both did $1. So go through EBITDA, discounted cash flow, and percentage of collection.
Okay. The percentage of collection, there used to be a debate about using that number. Is it revenue? Is it collections? Is it production? I will tell you, at least for the circles that I run in, the banks that I work with, nobody cares about production numbers, because they could be adjusted production, gross production. If you're in a Medicaid, Medicare type practice, production and collections are, off by a great deal. So they look at collections.
Which is revenue.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yep. End of year revenue, or trailing 12-month revenue is probably a better way to look at it. We're halfway through the year. In Arizona, I don't want to annualize a year's worth of revenue, because the first half of the year is usually pretty strong, and then the summer months dip. So you don't want to annualize. You'll look at the true last 12 months. The discounted cash flow model basically looks at your net income over time and predicting how profitable the cash flow of the practice will be. An EBITDA model is an acronym, EBITDA.
EBT.
EBITDA.
Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization.
That's that ASU MBA right there.
So explain each one of those words.
Okay. Basically, that's the easiest way to compare any business, dental practice or other, apples to apples. Earnings is your profit before 4 things that we standardize or take away to normalize. Interest. I'm assuming you don't have a practice loan anymore, so you don't pay interest. I may be looking at another practice where
When I graduated from dental school, they didn't even have banks.
That's amazing.
So I've been out a long time. So, but explain. So earnings before interest.
Interest.
So you're saying, okay, so this practice does $1 in sales, and let's say it makes a dime. So the earnings was, okay, it made a dime on $1, made 10%. Yep. So they're wondering, well, why do I need to know before Interest, taxes, depreciation. And why all that?
Because if I'm a young dentist that just bought a practice and you own a practice, there's no debt on it, you're not paying any interest, our net profit is going to be very different because I'm paying an interest on a practice loan. You don't. So if Ryan's looking at buying a practice and he's comparing mine to yours will look much more profitable because I'm paying interest. The reality is once he buys a practice, whatever interest payment that he's going to obtain is irrelevant to what interest I pay. Just like buying a house, right? The loan's paid off and you either take out a new loan or you pay cash for it. So you factor out any interest payments. The other ones that you factor out are taxes. Your tax structure and my tax structure may be totally different. Your accountant may have you on a pension plan and 401k and profit sharing to minimize your tax liability. I may be an idiot and use TurboTax and I pay a ton of taxes. We're uncensored. This is Dentistry Uncensored, so we can say that. But you factor out taxes because each individual's tax circumstance is separate and unique. And if somebody buys your practice, they're not obligated to file taxes and claim deductions the same way you do. Then the other two are non-cash expenses, depreciation and amortization. They're basically synonymous. It's the IRS's way of allowing you to deduct certain non-cash expenses. If I buy a practice for $1 million, every year the IRS, in their view, it decreases in value. And that's depreciation. It's the wear and tear on the chairs, the devaluing of the chairs. And that's an expense that you'll see on a profit and loss statement and a tax return, but you're not really paying depreciation or amortization. So you add those back. So the quick way to get to an EBITDA number is I look at a profit and loss statement and it'll say you collected $1 million, your expenses were $800,000, profits $200,000. But then I add back the interest payments. But then I add back the taxes, depreciation and amortization. So my true EBITDA may be $350,000. And that way you can compare apples to apples practice from down the street to across the street to Alaska to California.
Now, are you involved in the financing too?
Yes. Yep. A lot of what I do is help broker bring buyers and sellers together, find a good fit. A young dentist coming out of school will tell me their criteria. Hey, I want this number of ops. I like doing this clinically. I want to be in this part of town, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll find a match and introduce them to someone that's selling their practice. And then I have to help facilitate the process of transferring the real estate and obtaining financing for the young dentist.
Okay, so true or false? This is the word on the street. You come out of school, banks don't want to touch you for 1 year, and then after 1 year, there is access to capital. True or false? What do you? A
couple exceptions to that. Okay. That's generally speaking, that's very true. There is one bank out there that will lend you money straight out of school, up to I think it's $350,000 or $400,000. No questions asked, straight out of school.
Which one's that?
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo.
So it's an interesting lending environment because there's a lot of.
They're out of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they're? Okay.
Yep.
So Wells Fargo do $350 straight out of school.
That's about the number. Yeah. Okay. There's probably 6 or 7 national dental lenders that specialize and do hundreds of millions a year in dental loans, and each one has a niche that they fill and a criteria that they like. Wells Fargo really. Bank of America is always the 800-pound gorilla.
Is it Bank of America or Skank of America? I always get that mixed up. So Bank of America.
Bank of America, East West Bank.
East West.
They were...
where are they? Is that Charlotte?
No. Most of the group that I talked to is out of Pasadena, I believe. And so Bank of America is the godfather of dental practice lending. And they bought out Sky Financial, that was Practice Solutions, it became Bank of America. So through acquisition, B of A's...
Sky Financial, that was out of Chicago? Mm-hmm. That was a big one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So B of A's acquired all those groups, and they're kind of the big leading lender.
Are they the 400-pound gorilla?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and those guys are sharp. I've gone to dinner with them several times.
Joe DiNicola, you probably know Joe. Yeah, Joe's been there forever. Joe's a great guy.
And he probably did not appreciate that joke. I just think it's funny, Joe.
So... Bank of America has had a lot of employees that have left over the years and gone to other banks and started up these divisions. East West is one of them. They're mostly expatriates from Bank of America.
What other ones?
Zions Bank is a big one that's come on the last couple of years.
Utah?
They're based out of Salt Lake City. Yep.
Yeah, Zion National Park. It's good.
That's right. Yeah.
And
but the Zion's guys came from East West, most of them.
And the East West came from Bank of America.
It's pretty incestuous.
But Bank of America is. Oh, by the way, another thing from Salt Lake City. There was a laser guy back in the day. I mean, I think it was in the 40s or 50s or whatever. But if you find any laser company in dentistry, that was the teacher.
Right?
Oh yeah.
He was the godfather of laser.
One guy taught all the guys laser, and you go around the country and you find anybody who made it in lasers. That was their teacher. So as a rule of thumb, Bank of America is the 400-pound gorilla.
Yeah, they're doing the most number of deals. They have a certain sweet spot of practice that they like, and it changes. That's the interesting thing, Howard, is the climate's ever changing because these banks every quarter will look at their portfolio of loans. How many practices under 500,000? How many practices doing $1 million? How many multi-practice owners? And so the guys with the green visors and the 10-key calculators and the pocket protectors tell the bank, hey, we need to shift our credit profile or start doing less of these type loans and more of these type loans. So it's a pretty fluid market. The banks change their criteria, but generally speaking, B of A does the most volume. Wells Fargo has a niche for grads straight out of school and smaller practices. A couple of the other banks, Bank of America, Zions, they'll do dentists that are a year out of school, or if you did a residency program, they'll count that as a year out of school.
Okay, the other question is, because I watch them post on Dentalton all day long. Another question is, what about me? I have a ton of student loan debt. How does student loan, what like, you're saying Wells Fargo will loan you $350,000. A lot of them just gulped and said, dude, I already
owe that much.
I already have $350.
Yeah, no problem. Because the debt that you're taking on isn't consumer debt. It's not like you're going to Wells Fargo and saying, hey, I want to buy $1 million house straight out of school. You're saying, hey, I want to buy $1 million business that produces $400,000 a year in cash flow. So you're borrowing money to buy cash flow. It's a different proposition than just borrowing money to spend it.
Okay, well, so explain to them the difference between good debt investment and bad debt consumption.
Just that.
Because
the consumption
a lot of them think just all debt is bad.
And that's a common fallacy is, well, I already owe $500,000 on my student loans. I don't want to take out any more money. Well, the idea is you're borrowing money to buy a job that's going to produce great cash flow. You could go buy a practice for $800,000 and you're going to take home $400,000 a year. So even after you make your practice loan payment, maybe you're netting $325 or $300. The alternative is going to an associate position and making $150, $200 if you're a rock star associate. So even after taking on that loan and making the loan payments, you make more money as a business owner with a loan, generally speaking.
Okay, I'm just rattling through questions they're always asking. Yeah. And another one is...
Can I circle back to one more point?
Go ahead.
On the financing environment? So those 6 or 7 banks, between the 6 or 7, there's pretty much easy access to capital. If you're a brand new dentist or you're out of school, you can get 100% financing on a practice. If the practice is selling for $800,000, the bank will approve you for $800,000 right off the bat, plus working capital. You know, you need money in the bank to start paying bills, utilities, payroll before your collections and revenue and accounts receivable start rolling in. So they'll say, Howard, you're a year, 2 years out of school. If you've been able to produce decent numbers as an associate and you don't have a bankruptcy or foreclosure, they don't care if you have student loans. As long as the practice provides enough income to pay the student loans, that's great. They don't mind. In fact, banks are more readily approving big loans than small loans. Doesn't that seem counterintuitive? It's easier for me to get a practice loan approved at $800,000 for a big practice with cash flow than a $250,000 loan for a smaller practice that doesn't have cash flow. So the money's there, 100% financing, no money down, plus working capital. Interest rates are in the 4s, 4.5%.
So I got out of school in '87, and when I bought the house that your brother Eric was born in, I thought I was so lucky because I got the house at 12%.
Crazy.
And the guy selling it to me, who had bought it 3 years ago, was financed at 14%.
Yep.
So I just thought I was, Warren Buffett getting a house at 12%.
Yeah.
So when you're 53 and you see 4% money, it might as well be
It's silly
free.
money. It's free money.
Yeah.
I mean,
Might as well be free.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question I was asking. So I'm going to this small town, and there's 2 practices, and one is renting a space in a medical dental building, and the other one I'd have to buy the land and building. Talk about that. I mean, because they don't know. Are you talking about loaning money to buy a practice? But what if the practice includes land and building?
They'll usually wrap that in. So you mentioned that I do about 20 transitions a year. I'd say about 7 of them included the building.
Which I assume the land too?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
The underlying land and building. So we'll come in and facilitate the transaction where the dentist buys, the young dentist buys the practice for $800,000, and then we'll run comps, figure out what the fair market value is, get the building appraised, and say that's $500,000. There's a couple banks that will loan them 100% financing on the building also.
Okay, but what is your opinion? Because their question is that a good idea? I mean, some say it seems like males. This is not be a sexist comment. It seems like a lot of males say, "I want to own the land and building. I want to own it," and it seems like a lot of other people, maybe more women, are saying, "I didn't go to school 8 years to be a landlord. I mean, I don't want to be in charge of the land and all." Do you think it's a good investment or a bad investment?
It depends. It completely depends. It used to be the prevailing wisdom was that you should always own your own property, own your own land.
Is Tigger bothering you?
No, she's just licking the microphone. But you know
why you should love that cat?
Why is that?
Because humans picked up Streptococcus mutans that cause decay from cats in the Fertile Crescent 15,000 years ago.
Okay.
So, they pick up AIDS from a green monkey, but Streptococcus mutans, when they do DNA analysis, they know from permutations per year and et cetera that there's about a 15,000 year transmission. So, if it wasn't for those 2 cats, neither of us would have a job.
There you go.
So you should work a cat into your logo. Thank the cats. But
so owning the real estate. Getting back to that question, it depends. In addition to doing practice transitions, my other 2 partners, who we all met at grad school and did our MBA together a decade ago, my other 2 partners specialize in dental real estate. They have about 80 or 90 clients a year here in Arizona where they help them represent a landlord in leasing a space. They represent them buying a building, selling their building. So we have a lot of experience in that transaction. And usually the advice is to determine, number one, how long you want to stay in that location. If you're going to be there 5 to 7 years, then you probably don't want to go through the expense and time of buying the building, selling the building. If you're certain you want to be there for 30 years, hang your shingle, never leave, never move, it's probably a wise investment from a tax standpoint and from the ability to control your own destiny. I can't tell you how often we come across situations where the dentist, a client of ours, is a tenant in a shopping center or medical office building, and come lease renewal time, the landlord wants to jack up their rent by 10%, or the landlord won't even give them the option to renew. It says, "Hey, I got a bigger tenant coming in. I'm going to kick you out." We've had it now with the retail market rebounding where dentists are being squeezed out and being backfilled with Jimmy John's, because they'll pay a lease rate twice what the dentist has been paying. So if you know you're going to be put for a long time and you don't mind managing some of the headaches of building repairs and maintenance, it's a great opportunity to have a tax strategy and control your own destiny.
Well, all my friends that own shopping centers, that like a grocery store shopping center, they want restaurants and clothing shops and a massage, a mani-pedi. They don't want an endocrinologist and an endodontist and a dentist, because that's
It's not sexy.
Yeah, well,
and it doesn't drive the traffic.
You go to the dentist and then you leave. You're not perusing the store and saying, "Oh, I'm going to try on a dress. I'm going to get a mani-pedi. I'm going to get a Starbucks coffee. Oh, I'm going to get a root canal." I mean, it doesn't fit in the mix.
But here's the thing, and I'll say this to the young dentists that are listening, either in school or freshly out, to help validate that they made a great choice in career. Back when the real estate market was hit bad here in town, everyone was folding, every business was going bankrupt, and shops were going dark. People were walking out on their leases. The rate of dentists failing and businesses going belly up was less than 1%.
Right.
It was so resilient. The dental business is so resilient to economic downturn the way any other business is. So from a landlord's perspective, 5 and 7 years ago, landlords loved dentists. They were stable, they were solid, they weren't going anywhere, they kept paying their rent, and they didn't go belly up. And that's the same reason why...
They love the security of the lease.
That's right.
But it doesn't add any value added
that's
to
right.
the flavor
So
of
in the downturn, they loved dentists because they were stable and secure. Now that the market and the economy is swinging back up, they want to get in the high dollar retail tenants.
The last time I had, what was his name? Joe Nicola?
Joe D. Nicola
Joe...
from Bank of America.
Yeah, how do you say that?
D. Nicola.
Joe D. Nicola. Is that Italian or Italian?
It's definitely Italian.
It's definitely Italian.
Yeah.
The last time I had dinner with him, dinner in a bar, that is, with no food. He was... I think I probably see him every 5 years for 30 years. He always says it's about a 1% default rate. Is that still there?
Less than that
It's
on their
less than
national
1%.
portfolio.
So if you're listening to this, these guys wouldn't do the deal if they were nervous, and they're failing less than 1% of the time. So you couldn't even get this practice brokered and transitioned and sold to her if it didn't have a 99% chance of her working out and paying.
That's exactly right. And that's why big sophisticated banks with $1 billion in loans, like Bank of America, are willing to extend 100% financing at 4% interest because they've done the numbers, they've tracked the historical data, and they know, empirically speaking, dentists are the least likely to default of any profession.
Yeah, because Americans eat 150 pounds of sugar each year.
Yep.
And I think the three of us are the only three that floss in the entire state of Arizona. I'll have to be honest. In the 30 years that I've seen dentists come out of school and buy, I've seen I've seen two major problems. Well, I'd say three problems. I see a kid coming out of school, and the dentist has got this $1 million practice, and it's real complicated stuff like placing implants and full mouth rehab and all this stuff. And this kid can barely do a filling and a crown. But he gets the financing, someone co-signed or whatever, and he buys a practice way in over his head. And that $1 million practice on year 2 is doing $500,000. The second, but I would say the most common failure that I've seen in 30 years was the dentist bought the practice and then got into substance abuse. 85% of the time it's been alcohol, 15% of the time it's been Vicodin or whatever. And so I would say, if you have a propensity to addiction, it's not a time to buy a practice if you're going home every night and drinking a bottle of tequila or eating pills. But other than that, when these guys are doing the appraisal, they're talking about equipment, cash flow, EBITDA, whatever. But you need to look at those numbers and say, if this guy did all that money on molar endo and you don't do molar endo, huge red flag. But you know what the biggest gold mine I ever saw of any dentist
What's that?
All the practices and all time. This kid found, he was my age, he was a friend of Mike DeTola, another buddy of mine. He found this old man who didn't do crown and bridge. It was just big amalgams. Mm-hmm. And he had this very small office, like one receptionist, one assistant, and 3 chairs. And this guy had placed MOD amalgams for 50 years. And this kid bought this little practice for a song, and every day about 4 of those amalgam teeth would break in half and come in, and he would just do a $1,000 crown. I mean, he was doing 4 $1,000 crowns a day, 4 days a week for the whole 30 years in this very small office, low overhead. And that's my point. Some of these gold mines, you got to look at the clinical dentistry and your skill set.
Yes.
I'd be very nervous about some kid coming out of school buying a practice where some older person has this great gift of selling these full mouth reconstructions and all this advanced dentistry, and you're going to have a hard time selling an ice cream cone it's going to be hard.
So that's a good segue, because what we talked about earlier were the 3 methodologies I use to look at numbers on an appraisal. And I use those numbers to give us a high and low range. So using the example of a practice that does $1 million in collections, based on the financial cash flow and collections, say the range is between $600,000 and $800,000. That's the high and low range. Then we go through a full qualitative analysis and we look at the types of procedures that are done. what types of insurances are accepted, how tenured the staff is, the competition in the surrounding area. What are the demographics? We pull the 1, 3, and 5 mile radius household demographics and population growth, and we look at all of those things, and we put numbers to each one of those facets, and that moves the needle high or low within that $600,000 to $800,000 range. Because you're exactly right. If you can't match up clinically, if you don't place implants, if somebody's there are GPs out there now who are selling their practice where the majority of what they do are the all-on-4 implant cases. If you're coming out of school, I don't want you to jump into that practice. You're not ready for that type of dentistry. And if you eliminate that portion of the collections from the overall practice revenue, it's a completely different financial model.
So you go in there, you appraise, someone calls you up. And by the way, how do my homies contact you? It's menlotransitions.com.
That's right, menlotransitions.com.
And where's Menlo? What's that word come from?
So Menlo, the history of that, Menlo Park is where Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Menlo Park was kind of a hotbed of innovation.
Where was that at? Thomas Edison.
I want to say, there's Menlo Park up there in Stanford, but I feel like the original Menlo Park, Thomas Edison, was in New Jersey.
I think it was when he died. Henry Ford bought the entire house and had it disassembled and rebuilt in the Henry Ford Museum.
Is that right?
He was a huge fan of Thomas Edison.
He was an innovator, and that's what my two partners, we all went to MBA school together 10 years ago, and as we gravitated towards each other, we've been in a book club together for a decade, and it was always about innovation. So Menlo is kind of a tribute to the group of innovation.
So it's menlotransitions.com. You're Matt Porter. So you're Matt at menlotransitions.com. My question is, are you finding, so someone calls you and says, Matt, I want to sell my practice. So they contact you, $3,500. 2 weeks later, they got a selling price. Mm-hmm. Then you go out and you actively shop it. You look for young homies
here in town. Yes, that's right. Yeah. In Arizona, I do.
Yeah, yep. And but after you do that transition, you sell the practice. So here's a buck. Here's the practice. Do you hold their hand for like a year after, or do you recommend a consultant?
I definitely recommend a consultant.
And do you work with one specifically, or
no? I have a handful that I'll recommend. It's originally we started getting a request to do consulting. We've built a good relationship. The young doctor trusts us. They can see that we provided value and bring a level of sophistication and business acumen to it. And they said, hey, I want you to consult and coach me. And the more we thought about it, the more it was getting away from a core competency. We wanted to pick one niche and specialize and be able to say, I am the absolute best at X. So we've shied away and we've kind of pulled back from the consulting side, and I'll actively refer a couple consultants. I try and...
Who do you actively refer?
Amy Deshaw.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Amy?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Amy Sharp. So she's kind of shifted into a niche of doing transition coaching, where she specializes in giving them an evaluation, a chart audit right before they buy the practice, and then sticking around for 6 to 12 months to help ensure that critical initial phase
She's a real
is handled
numbers
well.
person on the practice metrics.
She comes from a Mercer background. She was part of the old guard that was Mercer, and Mercer's always had a good reputation.
Which was started by Imtiaz Manji.
Yep.
Yeah. And what's Amy Deschamps's website? You know?
Successessentials.biz or
You're
something.
right.
That's right.
And then
You're putting me on the spot here, man. I don't have the Rolodex up here.
Who's the other one that you work with?
Rhonda Crispin's great.
Rhonda Crispin.
Crispin. And they're all local resources, because the reality is I don't feel that you can properly help somebody without sitting down next to them and understanding the microeconomics of the market that they're in, what the patients gravitate towards, what's important from a patient standpoint.
So how do you find your buyers, and do you what percent of them, when they come to you and say, I want to buy because they're all alone, they're listening to you right now, they're alone. It's probably 85% chance they're commuting to work. And probably they're commuting to an Aspen, a Heartland, a Pacific Dental, whatever. Yeah. And they're wondering, probably wondering, if 10 people walked up to you and said, I want to buy a practice, how many of them do you say, no, you're not ready, you can't? Or whatever?
That's a great question. I've been told this before. I'm the worst dental broker, dental salesperson in the world, because out of those 10 young dentists that come up to me, there's 3 of them that after I talk with them, I'll probably say, no, stay where you're at. You need to strengthen this, or you need to get this experience, or you need to get your hand speed up, or you need to get some more business acumen under your belt before you buy a practice.
Okay, and talk about that. What are they weak on? What do they need to do?
If I sit down with a doc and I ask them about their production, and they say, yeah, I'm producing 30 or 40,000 a month in my associate position, and they want to buy a practice that's doing $1 million a year, I tell them no.
Right.
A lot of times, if they're talking about the amount of time that they can contribute to it, and they say, I'm working 3 days a week because whatever. There's a lot of dentists that are, I find younger dentists that are either part-time dentists or they're only working 3 days a week. I encourage them not to go out and buy a practice, because owning a practice is a full-time job.
Okay, I want to ask you another question. Sometimes these young dentists on Dental Town are saying, yeah, I see this practice for sale, and it's all Medicaid, Medicare, and PPO, but my vision is I'm going to buy it because it's in where I want to, they want to buy it for whatever reason, but I'm going to turn it into a high-end cosmetic Mercedes-Benz practice. So my specific question is it easier to buy a ship like that and do a U-turn and turn it around, or would you just start it from scratch or buy someone that's already going in the direction you're talking about?
Definitely the latter. Either start from scratch. If you are absolutely dialed in and very specific about what you want. I want the flow of the office to be like this. I want people to be greeted here. I want the desk to be this height. I want my office to be here. I want the countertops to be, yellow granite. If you're that specific, you probably should start a practice from scratch.
What about
if it's changing,
I want to change from low income Medicaid to I want to change it. I want to buy a McDonald's and turn it into a Ruth Chris.
No, go buy the Ruth Chris and spend the money, because what you're really buying more than anything else is goodwill, and the goodwill is in essence the patient base, a group of existing loyal patients. So if you're buying Medicaid, Medicare type covered patients, how are you going to do high-end dentistry with them? No patient on access is there his own version of it. No patient on access is going to pony up for a full mouth reconstruction or a set of veneers.
Okay, focusing still on the young kids, a lot of them are saying, Howard, you're lucky. You're a grandpa. You're 53. You graduated in the glory days. I'm coming out in 2016, and corporate America, Heartland, Aspen, they're gonna take over the whole industry. It's all gonna be McDentals when they're my age and have a grandkid. True or false?
False.
Well,
I feel very strongly about that.
Why?
Because the dental experience to a patient is still so predicated on the relationship and trust.
It's the only product.
Right.
The relationship. Yeah.
They're trying to commoditize it and turn it into a commodity with, a cheap, free or $29 cleaning, x-rays, exam. There are patients out there, and there is a percentage of the population that are going to gravitate towards that. But they're going to come for the initial cheap deal, and then in a year when they're ready for the next cleaning, they're going to the other McDental across the street, and they're patient hopping.
I would say it's the opposite. I would rather be across the street from every corporate chain in America.
That's right.
Than be across the street from Jared Pope and Tom Mattern and Tim Taylor and Bob Savage and Bill Summers, the guys in my neighborhood that are just crushing it.
Yep.
And the other thing is, I don't understand how you commoditize service. I mean, when I'm getting Manny Petty, what advantage of it is she's part of a national chain?
That's right.
If I'm getting a massage, what advantage of it if she's in a national chain?
Yep.
I mean, when I'm talking to a dentist, and by the way, when they go to these big corporates, they all come in and want a second opinion about some $5,000 treatment plan that some kid that was 21 years old, explained it. Yeah. So I mean, I'd rather just be in a world of only corporates. That'd be easy.
Yeah. Patients intrinsically know that. They know if they're walking into a corporate chain that profit is the number one priority. Well, okay, I'm over I'm overgeneralizing, but I would think the patient psyche walking into a corporate chain, they're going to be mindful that a corporate and national chain has to make a profit. That's going to be one of their top priorities. And maybe initially distrusting of whatever treatment plan has been presented to them. However, if I walk into your office and I've been coming to you twice a year for 6 years, and you've just given me exams and said, hey, Matt, you look good. Hey, Matt, you look good. And then after 6 years, you say, Matt, you really got to get this, this, and this done. Am I going to trust you that that's the work that needs to be done? Absolutely. Because you haven't pushed and sold, and you know me. You have a rapport with me.
You got 4 babies.
That's right.
When you start talking to Mama Bear and it's her baby,
yep.
I mean, it's only trust. I mean, she'll go to 6 offices if she doesn't believe.
That's right.
What's being thrown down for her. So
that's right.
She shows no.
And
I've never heard a mom with a baby say, "Well, I only trust McDental."
That's right. They'll say,
I always take
I'll
all
pay
my
whatever
babies
it
to
costs.
Yeah.
And you make a good point. There are other service industries. My wife goes and gets her mani-pedis from the same person at the same store because every time she sits down, they have a conversation. The gal there knows my wife's name. She knows the kids' names. She knows what activities they're doing. And it's enjoyable experience. And as humans, we intrinsically resonate through those interactions. And that may be a little philosophical, but
yeah.
I love it because when I go, my hygienist knows everything about me. I know she's got notes and she's looking up the notes, but still she remembers and knows everything about me every time I go. And that's important to me.
Yeah, I know a new mother who just had a baby that was tongue-tied who saw 6 doctors before she trusted someone's opinion.
And you can't replicate trust.
Okay, so let's the most important skill you need to learn is how to fake trust. Because once you can fake empathy, sympathy, and trust. So let's go to the other end. Let's go to the old guys like me that are selling. So I see a couple of people saying, okay, let's talk about liquidity. Never let your money get too far from cash. If we're in the valley and we want to sell a house, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath would probably sell this week.
Yep.
But a 15,000 square foot home with a 9-car garage that an NBA player owned might be sitting there for years.
That's exactly right.
So is there a size of dental practice that's more liquid, and are there practices that are more illiquid?
Yep. The sweet spot, I'd say, is a practice collecting between 700 to 1.1, 1.2.
That seems like a big practice. So 700 to
1.1.
700 to 1.1?
In collections.
Okay, yep. 700 to 1.1 would be the 3-bedroom, 2 house.
That's right.
3-bedroom, 2-bath liquidity.
Because, and it's, at least in our market that I can speak to, it's in that range, it is definitely a seller's market because there are many more dentists coming out of school and getting a license than there are retiring and letting their license expire. So there's an influx, supply and demand, and that's the perfect practice for somebody that's been out for 2, 3, 4 years, gotten their hands beat up, worked as an associate, understand the clinical side of things pretty well, feel like they're firing on all cylinders, and are ready to buy a practice. They can probably produce that amount of dentistry. Remember, you're backing hygiene out of that, so they're probably needing to produce anywhere from 500 to 800,000.
And I'm sure they got 80 million specifics on their mind. Do you give out your phone number or email? Or
yep, phone number is great.
What's your phone number?
480-290-7720.
480-290-7720. And how much does it cost if they just want to talk to you?
Listen, I've done more pro bono free work than I could count in my lifetime. It's very common that we'll get a phone call for 10 or 15 minutes, just want to bounce some ideas off of you. I don't bill. I don't charge for that. If you want to do an appraisal, we'll engage and do the appraisal, and there's a fee. If you want to help representing, negotiating, buying, or selling the practice, then we'll engage and there's a fee. But just like you, you'll have people come in and you'll give them an evaluation and give them an idea of, hey, if I want to do a full set of veneers, what's it going to cost? You don't charge them to sit in your chair for 20 minutes and work up and give an evaluation.
And a lot of times I just give them a free sack to put over their head. So they don't even just free paper sack.
But it's building goodwill,
So let's talk about the most difficult question. You're married, you have 4 kids.
It's true.
I got 4 kids. What would you say to this young dentist? She's torn. And when she's sitting there thinking, I could go to this small town an hour away and there's no dentist there. And going rural, there's no dentist. It'd be such a better place. But part of me's girly, and I kind of like to be in the big city and be by the shops and the malls and the cinema and the theaters and all that stuff like that. How do you coach someone like that? Is it better to go rural than urban? And what do you tell someone who's thinking rural or urban?
You know, it's a good question because there's no right or wrong answer, but they're two very different circumstances. To oversimplify, I see rural settings as much less risky because any rural practice that I've evaluated or appraised, their net is usually pretty good. Even if they're not collecting a ton, they're taking home good money. You can almost be assured a good job and a decent living in a rural setting. Going in a big urban or metro area, the competition's intense, and for that reason, there's both a lower floor and a higher ceiling. So
lower floor and a higher ceiling.
In terms of how successful I can be as a dentist.
Okay.
If I go in here in North Scottsdale, which is a hotbed of dentistry and very competitive, and set up shop, there's a chance I could fail. It's going to be hard for me to compete with all the other good qualified existing dentists and make enough money. Plus my rent's high, the labor's expensive for hygienists and assistants. They're more expensive. So there's more risk there, and there's a chance I might only make $100,000 a year. But there's also a much higher ceiling. The numbers that I see from some practices here in town where guys are taking home $800,000, $900,000 a year in one shop here in town, I don't know that you can do that on a regular basis in a small town.
Now, would that be in North Scottsdale?
Yeah, or Central Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing they got to realize that in some place like North Scottsdale, an acre of land might only have 3 people living on it.
Right.
But you come to where I live in South Phoenix, Ahwatukee, there's an acre of an apartment complex on there. There might be 500 people living on that acre.
What's interesting is I cover the Arizona market when I'm pairing up buyers and sellers. So I have a practice right now with a seller looking to retire in Kingman. Do you know where Kingman, Arizona is?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay. So he's got a great practice. It's fee for service. His overhead's about 45%, and he refers out just about everything. And that practice is at a hard time generating interest simply because nobody young wants to go out to Kingman, Arizona. If I picked up that practice, moved it, and dropped it in Chandler, I'd have 10 buyers in a week.
And the best thing about Kingman, Arizona is it has almost as much meth as Bakersfield, California. You know what I mean? So,
which is why the dentistry is so prevalent.
Well, seriously, the kids that came out of my class, I mean, you talk to Chip Castine out in Bakersfield, California. We got out of school, you weren't doing a denture a month.
Yeah.
And then meth came to Bakersfield, and these guys who hadn't done a denture in 10 years are now doing one a week.
Just banging them out. Yeah.
And I've even verified this with police officers in my practice. There's just more meth in Apache Junction than there is in any other city in the valley. So a lot of it's just culture.
Yeah.
You know, if you grow up in an area where the drug of choice is meth, there's just gonna be a lot more meth.
So I grew up back east in Philadelphia. I'd never even heard of meth. I mean, I was around the block a couple times, but heard a lot of things. Meth wasn't even on our radar back east in a big city.
Yeah, but you'll die of a heart attack from those Philly cheesesteaks.
Yes.
You're probably.
I've gone through withdrawal since I moved out here.
So let me ask another question. So a lot of dentists that are my age, sometimes they'll say, I'm just not that busy anymore. I want to buy another office for me. I want to buy another office for me. And then the other guy across the table will say, really, dude, why would you want 2 rents, 2 electric bills, why do you want to have double overhead and spend half your time in one and half the other time? Wouldn't you rather just have one overhead and have all your time in one? What would you say to the older guy who just says, Matt, I'm just not that busy. I'd like to buy something on the side to work a day or 2 a week. What would you say to that?
Once again, this is where I'm probably the worst salesperson in the world because I'd say you're right. Stay at that practice that you're at. You already have a rent payment. You're already paying staff. You're already paying utilities, overhead. If you're not maxed out in your capacity, either in the chairs or the hours, focus on growing that practice because you're already covering most of your fixed costs there. So every additional dollar you bring into your current practice that's not at capacity, you're keeping 70 cents of each dollar. You go and buy a second practice where you've got another set of overhead, another lease, another utility payment, another set of staff to pay. And once again, you're maybe taking home 30 to 40 cents on every dollar. So yeah, I'd stay put, grow the existing practice if you can, and if there's capacity there.
Okay, another question the old guys, here's a question that young people have. This is probably the number one question I see on Dental Town about buying any practice. Old man Farmer Joe's been there for 40 years, and every time that damn earth went around the sun, he gave everybody a raise.
Yeah.
And I just bought this practice. There's a bunch of old women. They're all like elderly, 50, 60-year-old ladies making twice as much as I could replace them with. But they've been in this small town. Everybody knows them. But god dang, they're overpaid. What do you so like do I fire all these old ladies?
Fire them all the day you get in there. No, I'm kidding. That's a terrible idea.
So what do you do?
Tenure's a double-edged sword, because if I just bought a practice where all the staff has been there less than a year, hygienist has been there 9 months, dental assistant's been there 6 months, yeah, there's low overhead and they're probably not getting paid much, but there's no relationships there. And I'm stepping into a practice usually as a first-time owner. I need to figure out how to maintain what's already been done there. You're biting off way too much if you're trying to step into a new practice, learn all the new patients' names and get familiar with the patients. And at the same time, you're going to learn how to run a business now, looking at the profit and loss statement and the receivables and the collections. And oh, by the way, now you're going to have to recruit, hire, and train new staff. Forget about it. You're overloading yourself right off the bat. So I will usually recommend, as an overgeneralization, for the first year, don't change anything with the staff. Anything. And usually 95% of the time, the buyers will listen to that advice, because what you're buying is goodwill. And especially if you're selling the practice, you're walking out the back door, or you're staying 1 day a week, the transfer of relationship needs to occur with the existing staff that's on staff there. So yes, the salaries are bloated because they've gotten a cost of living adjustment every year for 30 years. And yes, it's high overhead, but you need them to help teach you the ropes, show you what's going on, introduce you to the patients, and help make that transition easier. Keeping that staff around for a full year and then reevaluating is so much smarter than coming in. And let me get on a soapbox for a minute. I hear a lot from D4s across the country, especially here in town, and they'll call me up and say, Matt, I want to own 6 practices within the first 3 years. Like, listen, pump your brakes, slow down, let's get 1 practice under your belt. And they're so anxious and overzealous to get jumping, and I want to implement this, I want to change this, I want to change this, I have better ideas, I'm going to do things better than the last guy. And that's great, because that's what makes the economy go around. Everybody thinks they can do it better than the previous. My advice is always take 6 or 12 months. Don't change anything. Don't change the staff. Don't change the policies, procedures, systems in place. Because guess what? Dentists as a whole are very smart people. And the guy that you just took over his chair, he's been there 30 years. And I promise you, everything that he has in place didn't just happen haphazardly. He went to seminars, he went to CE, he probably had coaches come in, he studied a lot. A lot of them are getting MBAs, and there's probably some thought that went into why things are done the way they are. So instead of jumping in and thinking you know better, why don't you spend 6 to 12 months, seek to understand why things were done, sit back, observe, maybe you'll learn a thing or two, but at least understand it before you change it. Don't just come in and think you've got a better blueprint without ever running a practice before.
Okay,
that's my rant. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good rant. And the one thing I've noticed, the biggest predictor I've seen in 30 years is how hungry the kid is. When I've seen a bunch of dentists come out, their dad paid for their college, they had no student loans, they were single. Man, at 5 o'clock, they wanted to go hit them bars at Scottsdale, and they wanted to chase girls and all that stuff. But show me a Mormon kid who came out of school with 2 kids, and the wife's pregnant, she's staying home. They were so laser focused. They'd work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 6 days a week, take any emergency call. My dad always said, you show me 5 hungry coyotes, something's going to die.
Yeah.
And when I see hunger and work ethic, I'd bet on that anytime over a single rich kid, no debt,
Yep.
no hunger, no drive. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
I like hunger. And it's another interesting thing. You see that data in student loan debt. Do you realize the student loan default rate for America on loans over 250 is a fraction of the size for loans under 20,000?
That's amazing.
Yeah, because 20,000 they were never committed.
That's
They
so
were never-
counterintuitive.
Yeah, they were never hungry. They had never dove
Yeah.
off the deep end. I mean,
Yeah.
they were just dilly-dallying around. But the kid who went 300, 400, 500,
Yeah.
he's serious as a
Well,
heart
and,
attack.
and you wake up at 5 a.m. every morning with a mission. You've got that debt behind you. You wake up, you're a man on a mission.
So we're almost running out of time, but I want to back to the old grandpa sellers.
Yeah.
A lot of them are saying, I don't know if I'm ready to call Matt because I'm 65. I haven't really done much with this office 10 years. It looks
Yeah.
like it was decorated by whoever did the set for the Brady Bunch. I've been told that I need to sexy this thing up. Do I need to, what if I'm on old x-ray film? Do I need to go digital? What do I need to do to sexy up my practice before I call you? Or do you just say, it just comes down to cash flow, sell it as is and let the new guy figure it out?
No, I think there are a few things that you should do to spruce up the practice. Converting to digital is always a good expense to incur. I mean, you think about it, everybody coming out of school is being trained on digital. So the prospect of having to figure out the film and x-ray, what is that? There's just, even if the numbers are good, there's such because they don't know the process, they're going to be shied away from that. So converting into digital, great, absolutely. New coat of paint, new chairs in the waiting room, go a long way. What I don't suggest is spending a ton of money on advertising, trying to ramp up collections a year before you sell. Everybody sees through that. And you're spending the money and blowing the money on advertising, and you only get 1 year's worth of return before you're selling it. Investing in big capital expenditures, buying a cone beam. I've sold practices where the guy bought a cone beam 6 months before we sold the practice. That's like buying that Cadillac, driving it off the lot, and then turn around and selling the Cadillac 6 months later. You don't recoup the value that you spent. So the two other sets of advice that I'd give to older sellers looking to transition, two things. Number one, don't equate selling your practice with retirement. Those are two, I'd love to even have a separate conversation about this because it's so hard when I see sellers retiring at the same time, just emotionally to be able to hang up the drill and the loops and say, I'm done professionally. And at the same time relinquishing control and authority and being a figure in the office where people defer to you. That's kind of hard to do all at the same time. So the most successful transitions that I see is selling the practice a year to two before you think you might want to hang it up clinically. Sell the practice. Some young guy will come in here, 3-4 days a week and bang out dentistry. You stick around. I love to call it an emeritus dentist. You stick around as the emeritus dentist for a year, for a couple of years, see patients, shake hands, kiss babies, do the kind of dentistry that you want to do, leave at a decent hour, don't have to worry about all the drama associated with staff and, accounts receivable and billables. So spend a couple of years kind of easing out of the clinical side of things is much more palatable, easier to digest as you're thinking about retiring. The second aspect of that is a lot of guys hang on till the very end where you see the last 3 or 4 years, what do the collections do? Down 10%, down 10%, down 10%. Either they're just backing off diagnosing or they're cutting their hours for whatever reason. As a practice declines, that produces a lot of red flags and you lose a ton of value. If you've been doing $1 million for 25 years and then you do 900, 800, 700, guess what? Banks and buyers are looking at that 700 number, and that's the benchmark that they're going to use for valuation. So you've eroded effectively 20 to 30% of the value of your practice just because you took your foot off the gas the last couple of years. So I see that as a big fallacy. I usually try and separate the decision to retire with the decision to sell the practice. Tackle them separately.
Yeah, by the way, that disease is called golf. I mean, I have friends that are my age, 53, that play 18 holes of golf 5 days a week. That's a 4-hour game.
Yeah.
And then they're driving 30 minutes each way. I mean, they're literally spending almost 6 hours a day on their golf game. And I would add one more thing. These kids coming out of school, there's so many different types of chairs made.
Yep.
They don't know the name of the chair, but you call an auto shop to come reupholster those chairs. And whenever I've had mine done, they just come and take one chair a night.
Uh-huh.
And the next morning they put it back. And I mean, you reupholster a chair, it looks brand spanking new.
It looks great. And frankly, the older chairs, some of them, I don't know the technical terms, but a lot of people love the older chairs because they move and they have different types of adjustments than some of the newer chairs do.
I need to get Kevin Austin here, but he was a big Henry Ford fan. And you have to be a mechanical engineer to understand why these people love Fords.
Yeah.
What Henry Ford was most proud of is that you take his first car and you take a car 20 years later. Let's say you're in Kansas and there's some old rusty Model T down in the creek, and you needed a bolt right here.
Yep.
But it's a car 20 years later. That bolt's still fixed and still fit. I mean, Henry. It was the assembly line. They all knew that.
Yep.
It was interchangeable parts. They all knew that. But when they made design changes on a Model T, all those parts still worked. And if you go to an A-deck chair, A-deck has only had one change in design, and the whole time that was for obesity. They had to get a bigger weight because you start leaning back people and the chair go back. But so what? The reason those A-decks will last forever. But what's cool about those is if you have a 30-year-old A-deck machine in a museum, that bolt will still work in the new one. But
I can attest to the Ford. I have my favorite car that I've got. Favorite car makes it sound like Avalon. I've got a 1931 Model A Ford that my dad and I restored before he passed away. So I'll show you pictures afterwards. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Model A's and Henry Ford.
Wow, we need to do Kevin Austin talk about that. So I got to tell you a funny story about A-deck. So when we go on family vacations, they'd want to go to Disneyland or Disney World, but I'd want to go see
you want to go to Oregon and go up to...
Well, I'd want to see the dental companies wherever we were. So one time we got an RV and we left Phoenix, went to San Diego, then turned right, drove all the way to Canada, then turned right, drove to Minneapolis, St. Paul, then came down to Texas, Albuquerque, and back. But when we go through Oregon, we went to that place and... Kevin Austin, he liked to restore cars. And me and Kevin Austin are talking, and next thing we notice, my 4 boys have climbed up on top these cars that you could, were complete mint condition. Yeah. And I almost had a heart attack, and Kevin Austin just thought it was funny.
And Ryan hasn't lived it down. You're still telling the story.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that place? So basically, this is a world of... We started this conversation with there's no rules of thumb. The devil's in the details. It's all the details.
Yep.
It's all the details. So at the end of the day, they're going to need to call you at 480-290-7720 or email matt@menlotransitions.com. And if they went to menlotransitions.com, what are they going to find on your site? Is there any educational material?
There's blogs. There's education. There's some recommended links. What else? If you're in the Arizona market, we have listings for sale at any time. We'll have 15 to 20 practices that are looking to transition or bring in a partner. And we have just general facts and details about the practices. Obviously, whenever you're going through this process, it's a very confidential nature. So you'll usually sign a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement. We have that online, so you can sign that and then log in and see details of the practices that are for sale. For transition.
Okay, that's another. I'm glad you brought that up because another fear that dentists have is they want to talk about this, but they don't want to freak out their staff. How far can we get along? How far can we move down this process? And what is a good time to tell your assistant who's been there forever and your hygienist forever? And
you know what? I'm gonna write a book when I'm done about all the crazy stories and experiences with transitioning practices where the sellers are so paranoid that they'll say, hey, listen, come meet me at the practice after hours, park in the parking lot across the street, flash your high beam so I know it's you, and then I'll text you once the coast is clear and you can come in. I feel like we're doing a drug deal in the parking lot.
Or a KGB,
right? Yes.
Okay, selling
Yes.
secrets to the communists.
Yep. So as a rule of thumb, about 95% of the time, sellers are extremely cautious about letting anyone know. They won't tell their Henry Schein or their Patterson supply reps. They won't tell any of their staff, their patients, buddies from the study club. They really won't disclose it to anyone. And we have to keep it confidential. So
and is that well founded? I mean, is that good, or do you think it's paranoia?
It errs on the side of paranoia, but I understand why. They don't want to tip their hand, and if something falls through or falls out, they don't want the stigma of, oh yeah, he's not really invested. His heart's not in it.
I gotta tell you, I'm complete opposite. I've done it several times in 30 years, and one time I had Heartland come in, the man himself, and deal the whole deal, because my staff were all stubborn and they were all saying this and that and everything. And I was just sitting there and I just said to him, you know what, I don't know. I got a magazine, I got a website, a lecture, I got a dental office. I'll think about what you guys are saying, because the alternative for me would just be to sell it to Heartland. And then the minute they all realized that working for me ain't in the bag, and do you want to work for Howard or do you want to work for someone else? It wasn't that Heartland was good or bad.
Yeah.
And I found it a fantastic attitude adjustment awakening, because then the whole team was like, okay, we need to listen to Howard, because we know what we have there, and I don't know if I want to work for another owner. So I'm a very transparent guy.
And it's all about the level of trust with your staff. I've had some guys that tell the whole staff. I even had one practice where the seller, the dentist, said, listen, I'm going to vet the potential docs, and then I want them to interview with the staff. I want the staff to, thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah, we like the guy. No, we don't. So there's all different kinds and ways, and it really depends on your trust level with your staff. It's great if you can bring them in the loop, but so many dentists are fearful that the staff will leave. They think, Dr. Farran's leaving. It's going to be some punk young kid coming in. I don't want to work for him. My future's uncertain here. He's probably going to fire me because I am that person that's gotten a raise every year for 30 years. So I'm going to start looking elsewhere now. And that's the fear. That's why the confidentiality is so important to a lot of sellers and retiring dentists, is because they don't want the staff to jump ship prematurely out of, preempting.
But when I talk to the staff, I think the relationship they have with their patients and clients trumps that. I mean, so the dentist might be changing, a new guy might coming in, but if I've been cleaning 1,000 people's teeth twice a year for 10 years,
and and love those 1,000 people,
that's my love.
I agree, and that's usually, it all depends on the messaging and the way the conversation's had. Because if I were an older dentist and I were looking to sell my practice, I'd sit the staff down and say, we've had a great time together. I'm looking for someone else to pass the drill to. Don't worry, this is going to be a slow process. I'm going to vet them to make sure they're a good fit, because we are family here. And furthermore, I would remind them that the young dentist would be an idiot not to keep you guys on. And from a standpoint of continuity, each one of those staff members, even if you don't like the new dentist that came in, they still like each other. It's still a cohesive team. The hygienist likes the assistant, likes the office manager. They've worked together for a decade. They've shown up to the same office for a decade, same place, and interacted with the same customers, clients, patients. So there's still so many other reasons to keep the staff glued together.
And I'll just say one thing. If you had asked me what is the number one variable of success for any CEO in any business, it's always been humility. Humble enough to listen to your staff, listen to your customers, listen to other people's advice. And the number one thing I would run from if I was an old guy looking for a young dentist is just arrogance. I mean, once you're not willing to listen because you know it all, I don't care if you're running a Fortune 500, you could run that thing into the ground. Harvard Business Review has done psychologically profiling of CEOs in the top 10% and the bottom 10% for decades. And every time they do that, humility is always the number one predictive behavior of success. But Hollywood makes the CEO look like he's in a red Ferrari and he's got the hot girlfriend and he can blah, 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 blah. But I'll put you on the spot. Name the CEO of, since I've been born in 62, just a few companies have gone up 30, 40,000%. One of them's Walgreens. Mm-hmm. Name the CEO of Walgreens.
Sam Walton. Well, Sam Walton was the founder. I couldn't tell you who the CEO
Walgreens,
is.
not Walmart.
Couldn't tell you.
See, nobody knows because he's just a short, fat, bald guy that sits behind a desk and he's humble and he listens to us. He's just an operator. And they always want the CEO to be modeled as some guy.
They want him to be a Jack Welch or a Lee Iacocca that's bigger than life personality.
They always
right.
they want them all to be exactly well said. Lee Iacocca, and Jack Welch, and that is just not what the successful business owner, CEO for the Fortune 500 is like.
Have you ever read Good to Great by Jim Collins?
Yeah.
He talks about one of the predictors of long-term success of a company is in the transition planning. The companies with Jack Welch, Lee Iacocca, they do well under their watch, usually. But then when they leave, it creates such a vacuum of leadership. There's a lack of humility that's bred in the staff. And whoever steps in after them is destined to fail because they can't walk in those shoes. Yeah. So to have somebody that's even keel, humble, wanting to set others up to succeed after them, it is the best for a company.
Yeah, and that's what Harvard Business Review always shows. That you said that was your favorite reading in Harvard Business Review. Look for someone humble. They're going to listen to your assistant. They're going to listen to your hygienist. You're going to listen to all your patients, and then hey, thanks so much for driving over from Tempe and spending an hour and 10 minutes with me, Ryan, and the cats.
My pleasure.
Really appreciated all your advice.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you very much.